Yeah, we'll formally kick it off and say welcome on this dreary Saturday afternoon. I don't know for everyone else. I know, Rosie, you're up in Edinburgh, right? Is it sunny over there? Up there? Yeah? Well, it's not sunny here. So I'm feeling like is it sunny in Edinburgh?
Yes, it's really sunny. It's beautiful, actually.
Is it?
Yes.
Well, you deserve the sunshine.
Been out to the beach with the dog.
Lovely. Well, it's really dreary and grey down here, and it makes me feel tired. Although I've got to say, this week I've kind of got back into. There's a lot of kind of industry events and things happening in London, and from not going anywhere to now doing quite a bit in a week, it's really exhausted me. I think I'm not used to it anymore, so I have to learn what it is to go out now in the evenings. It's quite interesting. Anyway, but thank you everyone for joining us, whether it's sunny or dreary where you are. It's lovely to see you, and at least it's not dark. It's the days are getting longer, so that's lovely. If anyone's joined us for the first time, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoy your first event with us, and you come back and join us for others in the future. So before we kick it off with Justine, I just wanted to talk about the events because I'm getting lots of emails about the paid events. So with the paid events, if you have purchased an event, we've got this like snazzy technology now that when you log in to the Wellbeing at Home site and you go to the event page, you'll see the recording and it will recognize that you've paid for it. So we won't send you a link. We won't send you the YouTube link. It will just automatically be uploaded on that page, so you can just log in and watch it at any time whenever you want. And also the same with the Zoom link. Once you purchase the event for the live one, you can go into the event page and you'll see the Zoom link, and only you'll see that. The people who've purchased it have seen that. So it's always there for you to see, because I'm getting quite a lot of emails about, oh, how do I get in? I can't get in, and where is it? So that's where it is. That's that. And then a friendly reminder, if you use Facebook, please do join our closed user group on Facebook, our Wellbeing at Home closed user group, because we're going to be posting more stuff in there. And in fact, I posted today, I talked about it at our last event, this wonderful image of our lungs next to a tree, and you'll see how similar we are to trees. All our lungs are some of our organs, which is really a beautiful image. Actually touched my heart. So we'll kick it off now. And this, as you know, many of you who know me know I love nature, and I know most of you do too. That's why you're here. But I want to just tell you a story from last weekend, because I woke up on Sunday and I had a day to myself, because my family, my boys went off to watch a football match, which is quite a bit of a treat for me, I've got to say, to have a whole Sunday to myself. It was wonderful. So I woke up with a bit of a heavy heart because of what's going on, in the world, and I just felt like I just felt a little bit down. And so I decided, and we were really lucky with the weather last week, so I decided to take my lovely Louie, my Springer, out for a very long walk. So I went to a forest close by to where I live, on this lovely field. And no joke, I spent like a good couple of hours there on my own, just walking slowly and really taking in the atmosphere, and it just lifted me so much. I can't tell you. It was like I came back home and I felt like another completely different person. I felt like I'd had therapy or something. I don't know. Without talking to anyone, I'd had therapy. It was a wonderful experience. So when Justine and I were talking about the event, I was like, oh gosh, it is real therapy. It's therapeutic. So Justine, thank you so much for being with us. And I'd like to kind of formally introduce you. I've known Justine for many years now, and she used to run a travel business. She used to be CEO of a travel business, a special interest travel business. So she knows my stresses and she knows what we go through. She's been through it herself. But then Justine took a completely different direction in her life. So Justine, tell us what you did when you left and what you're doing now and why. Why did you go into this?
Yeah, so I still run a little bit of a travel business, because I think this is the age of, I think they call them side hustles. So I suppose the forest bathing started off as an interest and then became a side hustle, really. But it's something that I want to spend the rest of my life doing and showing other people how to do. And I think along the way, something happened to make me realize that as a species, we've lost connection with ourselves. And in part of losing connection with ourselves, we've lost connection with nature. And some people will say, which way around is that? Have we lost connection with ourselves because we've lost connection with nature? And nature being the planet, really, planet Earth, the thing that feeds us and cleans us. And I think I've just had a slow realization that connecting to ourselves, reconnecting to ourselves and to nature are probably two of the most important things that we can be doing. And so in learning about that myself, I realized that I wanted to show others as well. So not only do I take people on forest bathing walks and also help people within organizations to feel better, but I'm also a breath coach. So I've done breath work for probably 20 years, but I also decided that was a missing part of the puzzle for me. So yes, so I teach people one-to-one. I don't know if I teach people, but it's a session, it's a breath session. And when you learn to breathe better, you learn to, everything starts to open up really and feel better. So yes, it's a combination of the nature connection and the connection to self. So the travel hasn't completely disappeared from my life, but it will do more and more as I step more and more into this space of helping people to reconnect.
That's wonderful. I mean, it's so true that we have actually lost our, well, not us here, because we're more enlightened. No, I'm kidding. but as a human race generally, we have lost our connection to nature and really the rhythm of nature. You know, the more I learn about it, the more I get into it, the more I realize how similar we are to nature. And I was just talking about that earlier this week, about how we emerge when we come into spring. And, you know, it's just like nature. You know, nature rests in winter, it hibernates, it rests, it just doesn't do much. And then it emerges in spring and it really comes to full bloom in summer. And we're very similar, you know. But we kind of force ourselves to be different, and that's when disease comes or whatever, you know, we're not feeling comfortable within our bodies. So it's really interesting to just reconnect with what we're supposed to do, which is to be in tune with nature. So tell us, let's talk about forest bathing. Now, I tried forest bathing. I think, like, you know, there's walking through forests, of course. And then there's this science of forest bathing, which is the Japanese science, which is Shinrin-yoku.
Yes,
right? Correctly, very good. Shinrin-yoku. They took it and they made it into a science. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so shall I just dive a bit into the history and the science? Yeah. So the bit of the background of so Shinrin-yoku is translated as forest bathing, and it came about in the early 80s, I think 1982. And the Japanese government were the ones to coin this sort of phrase, Shinrin-yoku, which translates as bathing in the environment of the forests, really for well-being. And it's based on ancient Shinto and Buddhist practices. And Shinto is very much about connection to nature and a reverence for nature. And it was what we had in this country probably up to about 11,000 years ago. And you will probably term that as pagan now, I suppose. But it really means to let in nature into your body through the five senses. It's about seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, and tasting. So a lot of the senses that certainly in an urban environment we quite often switch off, like smell, you know, over a course of time in urban environments, there's lots of not very nice smells. When we go into the forest and we practice forest bathing, then it's about reigniting those senses. And the idea of researching the benefits of being in the forest came about in response to a public health crisis in Japan. So back in the 80s, the country was experiencing really high levels of stress particularly at work, and they had a really worrying spike of rates in autoimmune disease. So it was an economic project, actually, the research into the benefits of being in the forest to revitalize not only the health of the nation, but also some of the rural areas, because they were suffering from mass migration of people. So Japan was historically a very rural country, very forested, actually. I think it's about 70 or 80% forest cover. And most people were moving into Tokyo. And as we know, Tokyo is probably, I think it's probably the densely populated country in the world. So the first research that the government carried out, so it was the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. They went to one of the islands in Japan, very forested island called Yakushima, and they measured the effects of the forest there, which is cedar forests, on stress hormones in the human body. And what happened as a result of all of that research, which I'll come into, but Japan now has, I think it's about 62 forest therapy trails. And the government have spent about $4 million into forest bathing research since 2003. So it's one of those well-being areas that people who are very focused on science and wanting to know that it actually has scientific proof, forest bathing is brilliant. Actually, in fact, it's much better than the breath for having that kind of black and white science to it. But what I found also quite interesting is when they did this research into how forests and being in the forest affect human beings, they also discovered in the process that some forests also get ill. They get depressed and they experience stress like human beings. And I just thought that was really beautiful thing, actually, really quite touching. And in terms of the science, I just move on to the science and we'll do the kind of heady stuff because I think it's really good to understand it. And there's tons of stuff online, so you can find any of this online if you want to. But for their first sort of bit of research or experiment, there's a doctor in Japan that's quite famous now called Miyazaki. And he took 12 Japanese businessmen for a walk in the forest in the morning. And then in the afternoon, he took them for a walk in the shopping mall. And as you can imagine, comparing the results, I'm sure none of us here need to be persuaded on this, but sure enough, when they went to the forest, they felt much more relaxed than being in the shopping mall. I can definitely relate to that. And later they started doing real sort of proper clinical research and began to measure blood and saliva samples. And they do that before and after the walks. And I thought I would just share some of that research with you because it's absolutely fascinating. So one of the things they found was a significant elevation in what we call, they're called NK cells in our body, which stands for natural killer cells. So these cells are naturally produced by our body anyway, and they go around the bloodstream and they scavenge for diseased or damaged cells. So it might be cells that are infected by virus or also cancerous cells, or there may be cells that have kind of reached the end of their life. So these NK cells, they discover those weakened or damaged cells, they target them and they eliminate them. And what they found that after a day's walk in the forest, that these NK cells were elevated significantly. But what's really interesting is that elevation lasted for up to a month afterwards, after a day's walking in the forest. So what we're talking about with this, you know, in relation to our immune system, is that if you think about it as a prescription, so one day's walking in the forest will give you an immune booster for up to a month afterwards, which when I was reminded of that, and I keep having to remind myself of that, I mean, it's really quite incredible stuff. And the second thing they found that was there is a significant elevation, sorry, not elevation, a reduction in our stress hormones. So adrenaline and cortisol. And what they did was they measured the saliva, and they did this before and after the walks in the forest. And they proved that there was a big reduction in the stress hormones. And what was also interesting is that was even so for people suffering from significant trauma in their lives and people with PTSD. So even those people had a significant reduction in their stress hormone levels. And they also looked at the psychological benefits of being in the forest. So things like anxiety, depression, anger, fatigue, I think, and confusion. And all of those were significantly reduced. And that's even after just a 2-hour walk in the forest, because obviously not all of us have, you know, all day to spend there. But one of the reasons they discovered that the forest environment provides such a relax to the body is it's the way that our eyes focus on the forest environment without having to pay any particular sort of direct focused attention. So it's actually what happens is the brain sort of recalibrates, and it's a bit like, I think you could say, like defragging of a computer. So the brain recalibrates itself because it's not required to focus in the same way as if we're looking at a computer, or if we're driving, or video games, or even being in a flat, you know, with kind of square walls, obviously watching TV. But when you're looking at a forest environment, it allows the brain to relax. And I'll come on to why that probably is. And it's a term called soft fascination. And then they also looked at blood pressure. And a lot of research has gone into looking at blood pressure and heart rate variability, what happens to that in the forest. And they discovered that a walk in the forest was clinically proven to be more effective on blood pressure than blood pressure medication. Wow. So something not to, I mean, I'm sure big pharma companies know about that, but it's incredibly powerful. And what they found actually is it doesn't just lower blood pressure if they've got high blood pressure, but it regulates it. So if you've got low blood pressure, it will bring it up. And then they also discovered that it assists people with sleep disorders. I mean, there's so many, I mean, I see it with my breath practice as well. There's so many different types of insomnia. And they found, I think it was about a 15% increase in people's sleeping rates after time spent in the forest. I think that was after a day. And I'll just leave the science bit behind, but just finally, the last thing that I think is really interesting, it's the activity of the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's our rest, relax, and heal system. And it decreased the activity of the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight response. So when we're in a stressed response, when we're in maybe an urban environment, for example, our body, we have something called the vagus nerve, which runs through a significant part of our body, but through the front of our body. And it perceives things like urban environments as slightly stressful. And so it triggers off our sympathetic nervous system. And then we have this sort of chronic fight or flight response, which is going on under the surface. And actually, you'll find a lot of people now, because it is quite a stressful, modern living is quite stressful, then a lot of people are in that state a lot of the time. And being in the forest, which is a little bit like Stella talked to us about, is allows us to switch over to that parasympathetic nervous system, which is our healing system. And it particularly affects our digestive system. So it allows us to digest, assimilate our food, extract waste, and extract goodness from it, because it's healing our whole system. So all of those things you can look up. I mean, it's a very quick sort of run around some of the science that has come out of that research that has started since the 80s. And I think that's really brilliant. And I always start my walks with, I don't go into it maybe in quite so much detail as we are here, because the walks are really about getting people into their bodies. But I think once people hear, it's, oh, okay, it's not, we're not just going for a little walk in the forest. Everybody knows nature is good for us. It's actually properly telling you why it's good for us. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Thank you so much. And I think it's just being conscious, again, like doing that in a conscious way, going for a walk in a conscious way, like you're not just walking through, but knowing the benefits. And how forward thinking is the Japanese government? I mean, seriously, if
well, I think part of that is because of that Shinto background. I can't remember the stats, but there's a high percentage of the population of a Shinto religion and way of being, and that is that. So they already have the reverence for the forest and for nature. Forest, particularly because, like I said, a huge amount of Japan is forested, and so many people were living in rural locations up until probably started in the 50s, but there was almost like a mass migration from rural areas, and the government just realized that people were getting sick, and they started to make that connection. So there's a bit of background to that in the case of why that might have happened there and why it might not have happened here, because we're a lot more disconnected from nature here, and the amount of forest cover we have in Britain is tiny, really.
Yeah, but we can still, most of us can probably still access a forest or within half an hour, and I think this is the key. But it's whether we're given the incentive to do that by this kind of information. I mean, this information isn't disseminated unless you go looking for it. But if you've got the government doing studies and then disseminating that information, it's incredible. I just find it. In fact, I've looked a lot at what Japan does, and I think they're even how they handled the pandemic. They did it in such a better way than so many other countries. Shirley has a question. I was going to ask this question too. So, will half-hour walk in the park have a similar result to being in a forest?
Yes. So, Shirley, in fact, I was thinking about saying that just now. So, there's some very interesting studies going on. Now, I'm trying to think of the university. I think it's the University of Derby, but there's a few actually now. Essex are also doing some research into nature connection in this country, so that we have our own body of research, as well as Japan and America are doing some. But there's a lady from that, and I don't remember her surname, but she's called Kirsten. She's a doctor from, I think it's Derby University. And her and another lady that I think already ran podcasts about well-being have received some funding. And as part of what they're doing with that funding is they live at probably not that far from you, Stella, Crystal Palace, and they've set up something called Park Bathe. So it's taking forest bathing into the park and taking some of the benefits that we're talking about here and showing and proving that those can also be done equally as good in a park. There's some things that I spoke about with the NK cells. So that comes from the phytoncides. I mean, there's so much that we could talk about, but I don't want to overload you, but trees give off something called phytoncides, or plants do actually in general. And when those chemicals that trees and plants give off, phytoncides, they're chemicals in effect. It was reminding me of Laura, actually. It reminds me of the what do you call it, the flower essences, or the essential oils. Essential oils. They give off what in effect is essential oils, so that protects them from attack, so insect attack, maybe even environmental, and also from nature, so things like deers. So they give off these they're in effect pheromones, and they help to ward off attack. But what's really amazing, coming back to some of the things that Stella has talked about with the lungs, and I'll come on to this in a moment with the discussion around biophilia, but is that they help to protect the trees or the plants, but actually when we breathe them in, they actually have a hugely beneficial effect on us. And that is really linked to those NK cells that I spoke about, the increase in NK cells. So when we breathe in those phytoncides, that's what raises our natural killer cells. So I think it's really wonderful that that actually what the trees are giving off to protect themselves, we breathe them in and it protects us. So to come back to you, Shirley, you can get that for walks in parks as well. So plants do give those off. There's limited research on that. A lot of the research that's come out of Japan is around cedar trees and the different types of trees that they have there, but they're doing more research. But in effect, all plants and trees give off some form of phytoncides. So I do recommend you listen to that podcast. I've started to sort of tap into it. There's quite a lot now, but it's called Park Bathe. I don't know if the actual podcast is called Park Bathe, but if you put that into Google and put podcast, it will give you the name of the podcast, but it's great. And I don't know if you live in London, but I know that they were looking for people to help with some of the research. And some of it was around, if I can still hear traffic noise, am I going to be able to get the same benefits? And they do, people forget. Because actually, even where I am, I'm in Surrey, Caterham, and most places in Surrey have a main road somewhere. We have, like, we're the most densely forested county in England, but there's always a main road somewhere. And when I take people in the woods, I'm always like, oh gosh, you can hear the road, but actually you forget about it. And the research they're doing with Park Bathe is sort of scientific again. So, you know, they're kind of capturing people's feedback on things like that and doing proper research. So I hope that answers your question.
Very well, thank you. I was going to ask the same question, and also about it, trees, the important factor in all of this. I mean, what if you go for a walk in just a field with not that many trees? Does it have the same effect?
Well, that I don't know. That's a slightly different subject. That's really about nature connection. So yeah, I think we should probably.
Yeah, sorry,
yeah. But it's also really interesting, and we know that it's good for us, probably for slightly different reasons, but there'll be plenty of crossover. So, for example, those phytoncides, possibly because you're breathing in, but it's more specifically around the trees. And maybe if I could, unless you've got another question now, maybe I could just come into that with talking about biophilia, which would maybe help sort of tie all this in. So part of the reason that I think I got interested in forest bathing or coming back to nature myself, because I grew up in Cornwall, and you know, when I was young, up to the age of 11 or 12, I was lucky enough to live in a little village, and I was surrounded by nature, and I always spent a lot of time outdoors. And then, you know, come 18, I started traveling, and then 25 or 24, I moved to London. And those kind of years, I didn't really think about nature at all. And I think that's what often happens is as you start to get older. I think this happened to me about 38, as I started to change and start to reflect on my life. And that's probably, they do say between 38 and 42 is a classic when you start. People either have, you know, I don't like the phrase at all, but midlife crisis, whatever it is, we start to analyze things. And sometimes, you know, things happen to us to start to make us think people die or have divorce, or, you know, whatever it is. You start reflecting, and I think I started reflecting on my my disconnection from nature. But one of the things that really started it off and that really blew my mind is that, I don't know if you know, but as a species, we've spent about 7 to 10 million years living within a forest environment and only 11,000 outside. And that's quite a lot of numbers for your brain to take in. But it's the analogy that really gets me. So that's the equivalent of a 1p piece inside a football pitch. So that 1p piece is the amount of time that we haven't been living or been evolving within a forest environment. And the biophilia hypothesis is, it says that we all have an intrinsic connection to nature. So biophilia actually means a love of life or living systems. And it means that we're still hardwired genetically to the forest environment. And it's the place where all of our physiological and psychological processes were developed. And you could really say that the forest actually designed us. And if you just look, I mean, I hadn't thought about this till somebody, I mean, maybe it's obvious, but if you look at your hands and your feet now, those are actually designed for us to move through the forest. And we're actually still primates after all. And if you look at your toes were there, they were designed to help us to walk up trees. So it's important really that we start to do things, talking about the walk in the field or going back to nature, but it's to connect back to that primitive part of ourselves, because it's still there and it's still very present. And even though we live in this kind of sophisticated technological world, I think it's really important to connect our bodies back to that system, because as we've proven with some of the research, well, some of our own walks, but the research I've talked about, we feel more relaxed, we feel stronger, and we feel grounded in ourselves. So part of the work that we do with the forest bathing and with Shinrin-yoku is just to get us back into that space of slowing down, because that's how we used to be. We weren't, it's a very short space of time. And I think really it's speeded up since we had, smartphones. But just getting people to slow down, notice what's around you, and engaging with those senses that I mentioned. And it's that grounding idea is about having, getting back into that space of more embodied presence, so that we are living in that present moment. And I can explain, there may be some questions, but a little bit more about grounding itself. But I hope that idea of the 7 to 10 million years and the 11,000, and if I explain that to you, that 11,000 years is the point where we became, we went from being hunter-gatherers to being farmers. So we started arable farming. That was the change. So we stopped moving around. We started building little fences, and we started saying, this is mine, this is yours. How much do you want to pay me for that? And then many people will also say that a couple of thousand years with Christianity, that there was a big split from nature then, because we were still very, very much had a big reverence for nature, and the church preferred people to consider church and the priest as being the connection to God, or whatever you would like to call that. So some people will talk about there being a greater split happening again with Christianity, and that's a belief system. So, but just to help you understand where the sort of disconnections came in, and obviously then with Industrial Revolution, that was another big one. So I always think that's really, really interesting, because I certainly wasn't aware of that before I started looking into all of this.
That's a mind-blowing figure. Thinking about that 11,000 years out of how many millions again?
7 to 10 million years, we think, is our evolution of being.
It shows how much we've advanced then within those 11,000 years. We've had incredible advancement, but at a cost, I guess, to our inherent selves and our connection to that nature, to nature. And so it's almost been from one extreme to the other with that balance. It's fascinating. Thank you. And that one penny idea in the football pitch is a great analogy.
It is. It's very easy to understand. So, yeah, I think just the part, and that biophilia hypothesis, I think, is really interesting. And again, you can research a lot more on that. But it's the fact that, I mean, we hear it now. We hear it a lot more often. In fact, somebody sent me a link to a video today from in India, and it was called "We Are the Soil." And it is true. And you can read, you know, there's I don't remember the name of the scientist, but you know, he's proven that we are made of stardust. And if you actually look at the composition of the body, we're nature. So to try and think that we aren't, or that we are something different and something superior, is probably what we realize now is where we've been maybe going wrong. So
I think if we're not taught that, are we? It's not part of our education system. We're not taught that at school. We're not taught that by our family. Well, unless you're in a particularly awakened family, but we're not told as children how close we are to nature. So we grow up not knowing that.
No,
it really needs to start early, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, we'll talk a little bit about that as well with awe and wonder, and that loss of awe and wonder. So we can come back to that. But I think if you look at children, they are excited by nature. You get them out of the car and get them to a woods. Kids love it. I mean, where I do my forest bathing walks, Surrey Wildlife Trust headquarters, they have, at the weekends, they have little parties, fairy parties and all sorts. You can hear them you can hear them a long way away. I mean, I know they're with each other as well, so that's the excitement, but they're also excited about being in the forest. And we just need to get that back. We'll come on to that after grounding, but that idea of our loss of awe and wonder as we start to get older, you know, and we, you know, I remember lots of times my dad's, you know, telling me to stop being silly and messing around. And of course, that's what we do. And we stop looking at things with the same reverence. But when you're kids and you go, oh, look at that night sky or whatever it is, they just look, and you only need to say it and they're there. But of course, as adults, you know, oh no, that's a bit of nonsense. And so, you know, all of that happens as well, but we can have a chat about that. And I think if there's no more questions, we could just come on to grounding and exactly what that means to follow on from the biophilia hypothesis. So does anyone else have any questions on that last section?
No, I think we can move on.
Right. So we've talked about grounding, and I think grounding is quite important. And if you look up what grounding is, because I talk about it a lot with my breath work as well, but if you were to put it in online, it actually talks about confidence, bizarrely. I think that's bizarre, being sort of sure of oneself and having a strong connection with who you are. But I would say grounding is about having a greater connection to the planet and connection to the earth. And if you think about the analogy of a tree strongly rooted and its trunk is strongly rooted in the ground, and then you think about the leaves on a tree kind of blowing around. So the tree is the part that's grounded, and maybe the leaf is the part that's ungrounded. So this sort of an idea of deepening our connection with ourselves when we talk about grounding, and that connection with earth, which is kind of the link with forest bathing. So grounding, again, if you think about, we talked about it earlier, but about having sleep issues. And I see that with my breathwork practice as well. There are so many people that have problems with sleep. And I think most of it is because, you know, I've mentioned this word many a time already, but there's some disconnect happening between the bodies and the minds. And I think people end up being so much of the day. And sometimes that happens to me. I mean, a bit less and less now with the practices that I'm doing, but that kind of monkey mind state. So we've got a million thoughts running around, you know, every minute. But I would say that as a consequence of being more connected to the body, so being more grounded, then you're going to have better sleep patterns, for example. And if you liken it to a pyramid, so if you have a pyramid and the pointy part here, where we spend most of our time is in a pyramid here. So all these thoughts and energy, because we're energetic beings, all of our energy is up the top. And that's where most of us spend much of our time energetically. So what we're trying to do with forest bathing, or with any practice of reconnection, is to invert that triangle so that the pointy bit is coming down into the body, or even that we're kind of a bit more straight energetically, so there's not all this kind of busyness going up you know, in the top of the mind. So I think grounding is a really, really important thing to add into the mix, and it might seem like it's a bit of an aside, but I think it's really important, because being in the forest helps you to ground. And generally there hasn't actually been that much research on grounding in terms of academics, but there's a brilliant film, if any of you are interested in this subject of grounding and earthing, kind of come into sort of a bit of crossover in my mind. But there's an amazing film, it's free to watch, I think, on YouTube, and it's called Earthing the Movie. And there's some crossover between grounding and earthing. But I would say by being more grounded, so being more present in your body, there has been some research done on how that reduces inflammation in the body as a consequence of being more grounded. And there's been some studies on pain relief. So being more grounded helps with pain relief. And there's also been, I think it was on blood viscosity. So in other words, the blood flow is better in our body and it circulates better if we're grounded. And obviously that's got obvious benefits to our cardiovascular system as well. And there's been a small bit of research done on diabetics or diabetes as well. So the more grounded we are, the more we're able to process our sugars in our body. And I think the last bit of research that they've done is about improved immune response. So again, as a result of being more connected to ourselves, more connected to the earth, then we've got improved immune system. So you can see with some of that little bit of research that they've done on being grounded, and I'll take you through an experience of that shortly, it really ties in as well with the forest bathing. And I'll talk a little bit about what we do with forest bathing, but even in the winter, I try and encourage people to take their shoes off and walk barefoot in the forest. So not only we're getting people to feel more present in their bodies by sort of switching off their minds, but also feeling it as well with earthing and connecting into the ground itself. And if you would consider the earth as a socket, so a plug and a socket, if you would consider the earth as your socket, so where you're getting your energy, and you take your shoes off, because most of our shoes nowadays are plastic soled, they're either rubber or plastic soled, so actually they're blocking that energetic connection between our bodies and the earth. So if you take your shoes off, it's like that your feet are the plugs and the earth is the socket, so you're connecting your feet into the socket, which is planet Earth. So so there's lots of ways to get grounded. I think just being in the forest helps you to ground. Even more so is take your shoes off and walk around. Obviously it's a bit more chilly in the winter, but even if you can do it for 5 minutes or so, and even sort of feeling the crunchiness of the leaves on the forest floor is wonderful. But you could go out, I mean, obviously it's a bit tricky, particularly days like this, but lying on the ground is a fantastic way to ground. Sleeping, fantastic. I mean, kids do it and we do it with camping, don't we? So those are lovely ways to ground. Would really be about coming more deeply into our body, coming out of this idea of this sort of top pointy bit of the pyramid, the monkey mind, and coming into our bodies. So there is another way that we can ground. Breathwork is a brilliant way to ground. But there's another quick way, and it probably won't feel that quick now. I don't know how many of you are good at visualization. I have to say that I'm actually not very good at it, but I'm getting better. But you can do a quick grounding exercise if you can't go out into nature, or you're not very adept yet or haven't done much breath work. Another way to do it is it's called a roots exercise. And I generally do it before we go into the forest, when we're just kind of on the outskirts of the forest. I also do it before any breath session, and particularly if I feel people have come in and they're quite stressed. But if you're going in for a meeting or anything where you feel anxious, this is a really great little exercise to do. And all you need to do is have your feet on the ground. So if you would like to try this now, all you need to do is have your feet flat on the floor. So I think I can't see some of you, but if you're seated in a chair, then that's perfect. And just get comfortable in the chair for the moment. Make sure your feet are flat on the floor. And you can, sit upright, that's absolutely fine. And ideally, if you could close your eyes. I mean, there's no problem if you want to keep your eyes open, but when we close our eyes, we take our attention inward, and we'll only just try this for a few minutes, but I just want you to get the experience of it. And the more that you try it, the easier it gets. And it will just take you out of your monkey mind and into your body. So I'm just taking a moment now just to settle and just feeling fully present now in your physical body. And just bringing all of your attention to all of yourself. And just noticing from the crown of your head down to the soles of your feet. And notice the places where the air meets your skin and your skin meets the air. And notice where you're held by the earth. So feeling the points where your feet connect to the floor. And feeling the physicality of that connection. Feel the presence of the solidity that holds and sustains you. And just defining for yourself the boundaries of your physical body, the edge places, the places where your physicality ends and the rest of the world begins. And notice your breath as it flows into your body, through your nose, hitting the back of your throat and down your lungs. Expanding your ribs and letting your diaphragm sink deep down into your abdomen. Feel the pause and let it feel relaxed and flowing out of your body again. Warmed as your ribs spring back up and your diaphragm rises and your breath sings out from your throat, through your nose, out to the air. And just follow another cycle of your breath in and out. And with each breath, feel the rise and fall of your tummy. If you want to, put your hands on your tummy and feel it. And just taking your attention to the soles of your feet. And just imagine from the soles of your feet, you've got tiny little tree roots coming out from the soles of your feet. So just like as if you were the trunk of a tree, and from beneath the trunk are the roots that are reaching deep down into the soil. And just imagine those tree roots coming out from the soles of your feet and reaching down through the floor of the building that you're in, reaching through that floor surface and reaching down. So depending what level of the flat or the house that you're on, reaching down through the levels of the building until they reach the earth. And those little tree roots are continuing to reach down now. So they're going through the earth layers of the earth. Imagine them reaching down, and maybe they intertwine. So the roots from each of your feet are intertwining with each other as they're reaching down through the earth. And they keep reaching down further until they reach the rock layers. And they intertwine and they reach through each of the layers of the rock, all the while reaching down and down and down. Reaching down now until they get to the magma layers. And again, they keep reaching down through those magma layers and reaching down further and further and further until you get right to the heart of the earth, until they reach the white hot molten metal right at the heart of the earth. So you have a connection from the soles of your feet right down to the heart of the earth. And when you can feel that connection, now send those roots out laterally. So they start to reach out to every corner of the globe. So what you have is a tight root ball connecting you to every corner of the earth. And now, bringing your attention gently back to the space around you, you still have that deep connection to the earth, and it will stay there for the rest of the evening. And when you're ready, just opening your eyes. And you can make that very quick. You can make it long. You can make it last half an hour. But you can also make it very quick. And when you get used to it, you can close your eyes, imagine a root, imagine lots of roots coming out, and visually just send them straight down to the center of the earth, and then you can send them out. You can also do it that you draw up energy back up those roots, back up into your body from the center of the earth. And you can take it even further in that then you send it back up out through the crown chakra, or the crown at the top of your head, and sending energy back up. And at a time like this, when there's so much stress going on in the world, what's a lovely thing is not only to bring the energy up from the earth, so in essence we're taking from the earth, is that you send something back out to the universe. So I like to send out some gratitude that I'm very lucky that I'm in this little house in the garden, and that I have warmth, and that I have food, and sending up love to whatever you think is up there, whether you want to call it God, the universe, people who need it. So you can take different levels of that. You can make it very simple and just do the grounding, or you can bring the energy up and then sending your own powerful sort of loving energy back up to whatever you would like to call that, to the universe, the cosmos. It's beautiful, and you can make those as quick or as long as you would like to. And I think if anyone has any questions about that, please ask. But what I was going to do as well is take you through a forest walk. But I think there's been quite a lot to cover today, and I'm conscious also of time. And I really just wanted to talk a little bit. I think it's better than sort of going over time, but I just wanted to leave you with a bit around awe and wonder. And I brought a book, but it's getting so dark in the office that I'm in. I'm wondering if I can actually read it actually. But I just wanted to mention about the benefits of awe and wonder, and it kind of taps into what we just did then, with this idea that we can be connected to the earth anytime we like. And we use this terminology, Mother Earth, and some people I think roll their eyes thinking, oh right, she's one of those, Mother Earth. It is our mother. And that idea that we, in plugging into her, we get huge health benefits. And that's going back to that movie around earthing. There's so many benefits to everything that I've been talking about today. But I wanted to lastly finish about the benefits of experiencing awe and wonder, which I think you can even get from doing those roots exercise and imagining, you know, yourself and your energy going into the center of the earth. But there is real healing power from experiencing awe and wonder. And there was a study done at Stanford University in California, which showed that people who experience awe, so in effect, a positive feeling provoked when we encounter something vast, felt interestingly that they had more time available to them in life. Because I don't know about you, but you know, quite often I think that I just haven't got any time and life is just sort of running away with me. But they feel like they have more time in life in general, and they also have a greater life satisfaction as a result. So, I mean, you can interpret that as you like, but for me, that suggests that we all need to regain our imaginations. And even doing that grounding exercise is igniting your imagination, because there's magic all around us. We just need to choose just to look and to listen. And that's been a huge part of my learnings over the last few years, because I have historically, and I write quite a bit on and off, but I've written quite a lot about my gentle kind of a transition from being a person that was always doing and finding my worth, my self-worth in what I produced and what I did, connecting a huge part of my self-worth to my output, and just beginning to learn that it doesn't have to be that way. And there's a great book. There's always so many great books. And I would hold this up, but I don't know that you can even see it. I don't know if you can see how dark I am.
That's wonder. That sense.
Yeah, it's called That Sense of Wonder, and it's by a really lovely author. I met him one day and I didn't even realize he'd written this book. I spoke to him about something completely different. But he's called Francesco Dimitri. He's an Italian guy, lives in London. He lives partly in London and partly in Puglia. But in the book, there's lots of things. There's so much in the book about regaining, obviously, as in the title, our sense of wonder. But there was a bit that I thought that I would read out to you. So he talks about going on a trip to the New Forest with his wife. He's Italian. They don't know anything about the New Forest, and they go. I think they're staying in a hotel, and what happened bizarrely was my neighbours told me an almost identical story of their own experience. So if there's a bit that's not quite correct when you read the book, it's because I'm muddling it a bit in with my neighbour's story, but it's quite similar. But essentially, he and his wife get lost. And he's like, at the end of the day, it's not like we're in the Amazon, we're not going to be walking, we're not going to need to walk for 6 hours before we find a road. But what happens, and I think there's a part of it, I've written a book actually about this section, and I think that there's a section in his book about the fact that we don't get lost anymore. We've got GPS, we get in the car, or we've got a map. We're probably terrified, most of us, are getting lost. I mean, even with a lot of the work that I've done over the years, I'm probably a bit scared of getting lost as well. And he talks about this whole experience of getting lost and the terror, and then kind of relaxing into it. And there's a passage that I just wanted to read from the book for you, because it's relevant to what we're talking about today. So, right, hold on, let me get to it. So he describes it as that move from beginning to relax into his environment, that strong feeling of being in the wild, of being wild, finally liberated, remained with me. The trees came alive all around me, and so did the grass and the flowers that were closing their petals for the night. As we continued randomly on our way, pretending that we were choosing a particular path for a particular reason, the forest was moving all around us. It was changing its nature. It was becoming not just a voiceless place that we were walking through, but a talkative one. We were actually having a conversation with the forest. The forest was as real as we were. It did not exist for our sake, but for its own sake. It was breathing, it was sovereign, it was independent, it was a presence. And it's because he starts to go, because they basically start, it becomes nighttime as they're getting lost. And he just describes how he starts to see the forest in a completely different way. And it's really engaging that sense of awe and wonder, and how it becomes almost like real life to him. So the thing that I also want to leave you with is this forest bathing is also about, we get people to cross into a threshold. So I may get someone to walk, a group to walk for about 5 minutes, but there comes a point where I'll call it a threshold, where we're crossing a threshold and we're walking into the forest itself. And I get people then, I mean, you can't see it, I'm sorry that I've got so dark, but can you see that? It's called an eye loop. It's also called a jewelry loop. So if you go in to have your diamond ring, I haven't got one, so I don't know, valued, they take out a jewelry loop. But there's also ones that I get people to take one of these and say hello to the forest when we cross the threshold and start looking at things in minute detail. And look at the forest differently when they enter the forest, and just saying to someone, engage your childlike sense of awe and wonder, and looking through this eye loop, which gets them to see things totally differently in a magic way, just has an amazing effect on people. So these things we can turn on and off. We can turn on our childlike imagination and engage in the forest in a completely different way, rather than saying, oh, it's a really grey day, I'm just going for a walk in a forest. And I hope that some of that scientific background has also helped you to really understand that there are proper benefits to it, and some of the reasons why are to do with our physiology and our past. So I think that's it. I've done an awful lot of talking, but I just felt like there was so much that I wanted to tell you. So I hope that was okay. And we didn't have too much time.
There's so much more we want to know, actually, so much more I want to know. But maybe you'll come another time and tell us more, because I think what I was going to ask you is, there's forest, whenever I've done like a proper forest bathing session, I've been guided by somebody, you know, and someone I've gone with somebody. That's kind of the best way to do it, or you can go off and do it yourself?
Yes, you can do it yourself. I mean, it's an interesting one for women, because I find women are quite reluctant to go into a forest on their own, and I totally get that, and I was definitely like that before. So there is that, but you can. The idea of going with the guide is that it's a bit like having a personal trainer in the gym. You can go to the gym and you can do things and you can get tons of benefit. But when you have a personal trainer, in terms of training in the gym, it's, you know, you'll work harder. I'm not saying that you'll work harder, but it's by having someone there, it probably stops you looking at your phone or getting distracted. It helps you to focus. But absolutely, you can do it on your own. You can go with a friend, but again, with a friend, you have to be disciplined, because what you're really doing is going to have a relationship with nature, specifically with the forest. So if you're chatting with your friend, you're not going to have the same experience. So that's why sometimes I find it better to go on my own. But that's the benefit of going with someone. And actually, forest bathing sessions do not cost a lot of money. People charge no more than £40 for, it's generally 3 hours. It's well worth it. But you can do forest bathing on your own. I'm actually just working on some audio guides. So the idea is you can either go on your own or you can go with a friend. and then you've got an audio guide. So that's another idea. I don't know if anyone else is doing those, but it occurred to me that that was a great idea. I mean, you do have to have your phone, but I try and get people. I mean, I'm still working on them, but I'm nearly done. But try and get, you know, I just pause through the session so people don't always have to go to their phone and press pause. But it, you know, it's not perfect, but it's another good way of doing it. So some guided audios are another way.
Well, two things. Firstly, this question from two people, the same question about woods versus forest. Is it any different?
Same thing, yeah. It's an interesting thing, and I do you know, I remember that.
We can't see you anymore, by the way. You know, you're like,
yeah, I know, and
I'm like, by having that relationship with the forest as we're walking through, and it's getting dark.
I can just turn a light on a second. Just talk about yourself a moment.
She's disappeared. Yes, you're back.
I'm in a little house in the garden, and the lighting isn't particularly brilliant, so I'm sorry about that. I should have thought about that in advance. But anyway, I am still here.
Woods versus forest.
Yeah, I remember getting hung up on that. What does it mean? I mean, I don't really think that there is a difference. I don't remember what happened when I looked it up, but I think they're the same thing. I think they're interchangeable. For me, a forest always sounded like something a lot bigger than a woods. Mm-hmm. So for example, on the road that I live in, there's a patch of woodland there. I wouldn't call that a forest, but I suppose I could. So I think the terminology is just interchangeable. I mean, there may be a better scientific answer to that in terms of size, but I don't think so. So you can use any word you like.
Yeah, I'd love for you to do, I mean, I don't know who, you're in Surrey, right? So I'm not sure who would go to Surrey, but I'd love to organise a day.
Oh, we can do it anywhere. I travel around
anywhere, okay, but I think people are scattered all over the country, but we can maybe do a little survey and find somewhere closer to, I don't know, somewhere that would be easy. I'd love to do that and finally meet some of these lovely people.
Definitely.
And I just want to, before we finish off, and just thank you so much for, it's fascinating talk, fascinating, really interesting. So, I mean, I've learned so much here personally. I want to like delve in deeper here. And thank you for talking about your book, which I know you've written but haven't published yet.
It's not out yet, no, it's still a PDF, so it will come out at some point.
Yeah, which will keep everyone up to date with. And then I just want to finish off with absolutely endorsing this idea of awe and wonder, because this is something that I know I had as a child. We've all had as children, and we lose it along the way. And it's something that I feel like I've redeveloped or found again over the last 5 years of my life. Actually, once I got into my midlife again, you know, like similar to what you say, and then I really have found it. And I walk around and I look at the sky, and I will look at the moon, and I'll stop and go, wow, wow. And you know, if I'm out with family or friends, I think some of them think I'm a bit nuts, because I'm just like, wow, look at that sky, look at that sky, and I get very excited about it. But it's just it just lifts your mood. And once you notice just the beauty around you, you know, it just totally lifts your mood, and you're so grateful for being here and being able to access all of this. And some of my family who used to take the mickey out of me for doing this are beginning to do the same thing. So I feel like
one is working, it's rubbing off.
It's wonderful. So please, everyone wants a forest walk. Okay, but Shelley, you're up north, right? So will you come down somewhere?
Well, or if not, Shelley, so I'm part of a group of wonderful, actually they are all women, but that's not for any reason, but the women that I did my advanced forest bathing training with, we have a WhatsApp group, and they're spread all over the country. So if 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 it's not possible for you to get involved, if we do organize something, I could put you in touch with somebody that would be up your way, because I seem to have a bit of a spread of people. They're all wonderful and they all do forest bathing walks. So if you find that you would like to do something and we do something and it's not possible for you to come that far, then I can let Stella know. If you just get in touch with Stella and tell her where you are, and I will give you a name of somebody you could get in touch with to do that up nearer you.
Perfect. But I think we need to there's obviously some appetite for this, so we'll organize it. We'll do a little survey about where we do it, and then you can go along. I'd love that. It's so exciting. So good. Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, and thank you for being with us. And please come back and join us again. Maybe come and do some breath with us.
Be delighted.
And everybody, thank you for coming along
Thank you.
on a Saturday evening, on dreary if you're down south, and not so dreary if you're up north. But anyway, on a Saturday evening. And have a beautiful week ahead. I'm going to take a couple of weeks off on these because I'm going on holiday, yay! And I'm really excited. So yeah, you won't be seeing anything for a couple of weeks, but I'll be in touch when I get back, and we'll have our next session then. But in the meantime, stay happy, stay healthy, and lots of love to everybody. And see you soon. Take care.